And thankful for the visitors. This morning, if you'll turn over with me to Psalm 63. Psalm 63. We'll go ahead and read the whole psalm. I'll get there eventually. Just wait. Sorry, I have to use my phone. I might usually apparently misplaced the Bible there. All right. Sorry. So, Psalm 63, verse 1. It says, O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee, in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live, I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. When I remember thee upon my bed, and meditate on thee in the night watches, because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword, they shall be a portion for foxes. But the king shall rejoice in God. Every one that sweareth by him shall glory. But the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. Let's start off in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we do thank you so much for all that you've done for us, Lord. I thank you for this beautiful day you've given us. Thank you for this time that we could be together, Lord. We're so thankful to live in a country where we can freely come and worship you, that we have your word, Lord. I pray that you would help us to just take advantage of the freedoms you've given us. Help us to be a light and a witness to those around us, Lord, that we would just show people the joy and the hope that there is in Jesus, Lord, and just pray that you would awaken the hearts of the lost, Lord, that they would see how important eternity is, Lord, and that you are their only hope. And Father, just pray for your grace this message, and just pray that you'd help us each to use our lives for your glory, Lord, and just pray that you would be with the pastor and his family, Lord, as they're traveling, and just pray that you bless them and their time together. And Father, all those mentioned that are sick and have different things they're going through, Lord, we know that you work all things together for good to them that love God and to them who are the called according to your purpose, Lord. And just pray that you would bless each one and strengthen your children and yourself, Lord, and just pray you bless the gospel, the hearts of the lost, that many would be saved. And Father, just pray you guide us in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I was reading Psalm 63, and it's a psalm of King David, and I think this psalm is especially kind of interesting because as you read about King David and his life, I think this psalm kind of captures a lot about his life from the beginning of where we start learning about him kind of throughout his life. So, and I think that David is also, his life as recorded in the Bible is probably one of the most eventful lives that we read about in the Old Testament. And there's two things I want us to think about today as we kind of walk through this. Number one, what was David's, in the course of his life, what destination was David always focused on? And number two, how did he travel while he was on his way to his destination? What was his manner in his life, and how did he travel? So, starting off, we'll read, again, just the first two verses of Psalm 63 there, kind of looking at David's early life, when we first start learning about David in the Bible. Psalm 63, verse 1 and 2, again, O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee, my soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. So, we see here in the first part of our text that David is saying that he will seek God early. So we know that as a young man, David was even seeking the Lord, and when he's first discussed in the Bible, it seems that he's saved, he's following God already, and he's just described as a youth. But you can see he's not wasting his life, he's not trying to go have some fun, and then later in life, when he's old, some people say, oh, once I'm old, then I'll worry about religion or something like that. But David has made it his purpose early in life to seek the Lord. If we go over to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13. This is one of the earlier sections talking about David. It says, this is talking about the prophet Samuel. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him, talking about David, him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. And then if you skip down to verse 18, it says, Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. So those two verses are kind of an early description of what we read about David. It talks about Samuel the prophet going to anoint David to be king in place of Saul, because Saul was not following the Lord. And then, obviously he already had a reputation with some of these people that were around King Saul at the time, who knew that he was a prudent man. God's guidance gives us prudence. He was valiant. He was not afraid. He was a comely person, and it says the Lord was with him. So they knew from his personality, from his testimony, obviously just from the people he knew, they knew that he was following the Lord and the Lord was with him. So if we think about that in the context of, again, Psalm 63, kind of just taking that as segments of David's life, I think kind of are discussed in Psalm 63 and kind of using that as a picture of these different areas of his life. So, again, verse 1 from Psalm 63, O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee, my soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. So we see here that David did seek the Lord early in his life. He was committed to serving the Lord, and God blessed him with many other gifts as well. He's described as being valiant, being a comely person, which means well-favored. God blessed David abundantly. And with all those blessings, though, David's purpose was first to follow and serve God. He wanted to serve God with all his heart, and he knew that the Lord would bless him in that. So he was focused on doing that first and letting everything else kind of work itself out. So if we think about verse 2 that we read earlier, David also saw the power of the Lord. It talks about seeing the power of the Lord in the sanctuary. But David saw this in his whole life. Even as a kid, he started to see some amazing things, God working in his life and protecting him. But he faced those challenges and those fears. He faced those things in faith, and I think that's why God blessed him in that. So if you're still in 1 Samuel there, chapter 17, just one chapter over, looking at verse 34. So 1 Samuel 17, verse 34, we'll read 3 verses here. It says, And David said unto Saul, so this is when David had gone to Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. So, even though David was just a youth at this time, he kept his father's sheep. He was out there, in the pasture watching the sheep, and a lion attacks him at one point, and then a bear, describes more in detail. A bear comes and takes one of the sheep. I think most of us would see a bear and run the other way and see what happens. But David chased that bear down, got the lamb out of his mouth, and then grabbed, the bear came after, and he grabbed him by the beard, and killed the bear. That's a pretty intense thing for a youth to do, much less anybody to do that. But, you can just see from David's life that he didn't flinch about it. He just knew that God was with him, and he was going to be faithful in the service God had put him in, and serving his father and taking care of the sheep. And I think that we hear a story like that and we say, wow, I could never do that. I would never walk up to a bear and grab him by the beard. But I think we think about people who are extremely brave, or that we hear about being very brave. We think about them almost as superhuman, or we think about them as, having more bravery or more courage than we could ever have. But it's because before David ran into the bear, before he came into that situation, he was already prepared in his mind what he was about and what his values were. So he was already fully resolved that he was going to serve God, and serving God, he would serve his Father in this. And he was going to be faithful in whatever he was put in, and he was not going to be afraid. So before that happened, David was ready. If right then, that was the first time David thought, is he ready to serve God? Does he trust God? Does he think that God will get him through this? He probably would have flinched and gone away. He was already resolved. So I think that's an important message for us. The time to get courage and have faith in God is before the challenge. It's not during the challenge. It's not when we're challenged with something very difficult in our lives. It's before then. And so you can see David was, and even as a youth, he had already purposed himself to serve the Lord, and God blessed him and protected him. And then as he was down here with Saul, seeing Goliath, and he said, I saw this lion and this bear, and just like God delivered those into my hand, I'm not worried about this Philistine. So thinking about back in verse 2 of Psalm 63, to see thy power and thy glory, so I have seen thee in the sanctuary. David was fully convinced of God's faithfulness before facing the bear. So he was ready when the time came, and he was ready for more. He wasn't afraid. So we see from David's early life there, he had purpose in his life early to serve the Lord. That was his mindset going into everything he went into. And even from a youth, God blessed him quickly. He came into the presence of the king. He was there in the big battle right in front of Goliath, hearing Goliath come out and challenge the children of Israel. So God was already using him in that. And so the second part of David's life we'll kind of think about is, he's really comes to a great challenge facing the giant. The thing that I think even people in the world, almost everyone knows about the story of David and Goliath. And as it came to this point in his life, he really, he kind of stepped into it just like he stepped into facing the bear or the lion as he's discussing this with Saul. But we'll kind of back up to the beginning of 1 Samuel 17 to kind of get some context here. I'm going to read a bit of this so we can just see what David was facing. So we'll go to 17, verse 1. We'll kind of read down through verse 11 there. It says, Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochoh, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Azekah in Ephesdammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So that's roughly 9'9". A cubit's about 18 inches, and a span is a span in your hand. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? To Saul, choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So, putting that in context, Israel, there's very valiant and brave men in Israel. Saul is described as being a head and shoulders above everyone else in Israel. So, Saul is the biggest dude in Israel, and he is, a very valiant soldier in most respects. But obviously, he's afraid. He's not trusting God. He's looking at Goliath and saying, Goliath is bigger than me, and he's afraid of Goliath. And there's nobody in Israel that's willing to step up to the challenge that Goliath puts down there. And then skipping down to verse 23 there, it said, as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. So, here's this huge warrior that humanly looks completely invincible. Saul and all the other brave soldiers in Israel were crippled with fear. You know, they're shaking, they're running from Goliath when he comes out and says this. But I think it's because they were used to relying on their own strength. You know, you have brave soldiers, strong people. If you're relying on your own strength, you're going to come up to something at some point that is stronger than you. There's a situation you can't handle. And Saul, I'm sure, is bigger and more powerful, at least at this time, when David's still a youth, than David was. But Saul's afraid. Saul's shaking in his boots. So when they knew that, when the soldiers came against something they knew they could not humanly defeat, they came against the Philistine, bigger than anyone that they'd ever seen. They didn't have courage in themselves anymore. So from man's perspective, they were kind of without hope. You know, this happened, Goliath kept coming out and challenged them. Israel would run away, they'd come out and run away. Saul, it didn't seem like there was any answer. Saul had no solution to this as the leader of the children of Israel. So if we look down there in verse 26, though, in 1 Samuel 17, so as David had heard this, he had just come to the battle and kind of heard this happen again. And he saw the Israelites be afraid, and Saul afraid. Verse 26 says, And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go down and fight with this Philistine. So it's kind of incredible the way David comes into that situation. You know, he basically says, in front of all these seasoned warriors, in front of Saul, who are all afraid, he said, you know, don't sweat it, guys. I'll go down. I'll fight him. And he almost takes it like just completely in stride. He's not worried about it. You know, how in the world can he step into this situation that looks like it's certain death? How can he step into that with no fear, no hesitation? Verse 33 down there a little farther says, And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. So again, Saul cannot rationalize this. He's looking at it from the human side, from the fleshly perspective. And to see somebody who's totally trusting the Lord, Saul doesn't get it, but David is just completely faith in God, not faith in David. David's physical strength obviously cannot match Goliath or probably even Saul at this time. But his courage comes from his extreme confidence in the faithfulness of God. So let's see, verse 34 is David's response. And David said unto Saul, we read this earlier, but I'll read it again. David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. So, as we know, then after this, David went out with a sling and 5 stones, used one of those stones, and used it to defeat the giant Goliath. Went down there, and actually, I think we'll read this here. I'll read it in a minute here. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but he was. David didn't think about it as how he would approach it in the flesh. He was just completely trusting God. And he was utterly convinced that God would take care of him, even in this struggle. And he wanted to go out and glorify God. If you think about what he said there, why he wanted to defeat Goliath, it says to take away the reproach from Israel. He knew that Goliath was coming out. The Philistines were very aware that the children of Israel were God's chosen people, that they had been rescued out of Egypt. If you read in other places, they definitely had heard about that, and they knew that Israel served God. And so when Goliath came out and said, I defy the armies of Israel, he was defying their God, their people. And David took this personally as a reproach against God, not necessarily against Israel, but he was wanting to defend the glory of God was his purpose. So if we read down there, we'll read the actual encounter with Goliath there, verse 42. It says, "And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves," which is sticks? "And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give thy the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with the sword and the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth." So, again, let's kind of back up to Psalm 63, verse 3 through 5. We'll read real quick before we get into that. "Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips." So, David was faced with this seemingly impossible task, but he just goes into it joyfully, no flinching, no concern. He walks into it, says, "Saul, I got this, I'll do it." He goes up, runs at Goliath. He doesn't even, kind of hesitate there. He runs at this giant, destroys the giant, and, you can just see from the way David approaches that, the way he's living his life, that he is just full of the joy of the Lord, full of faith and confidence in God, and he has just committed his life to serving God wherever God puts him. So, the odds don't even factor into David's decision. If you think about the odds, David was not thinking about that. And then, like we see in verse 3, David was more in love with the Lord than he was even with his own life. He was willing to risk his life at a moment's notice. It doesn't say David came down to this battle and thought about it and said, "Yeah, I'll go out there." He heard the challenge. He said, "Saul, send me out there. I'll do this." He was ready to go right away. He did not value his life above serving God. He said, "Whatever God wants me to do, I'm going to do it right now." And in verse 4, even while talking to Goliath, David was glorifying God. And he was telling Goliath even what a great God that they served, and that he was there to protect and defend God's glory. So even while facing this, seemingly impossible task, again, David is out there in confidence serving God and seeking to glorify God. And for verse 5, it's also kind of a reminder there in Psalm 63, verse 5, David is confident that God will bless him and that he can be joyful in serving him because he knows that God will take care of him. So that's really kind of the first thing people learn about David, obviously, and it's the most famous probably part of David's life, but it's really just the beginning of his life in the account, at least given in the Bible. He's just a youth at that time, seemingly on top of the world. But again, he doesn't glorify himself in that. He glorifies God and says he gives God all the glory. God's going to do this. And he did. So, as you continue to read about David, though, he was serving God. He was serving Saul then after this. And it seemed that everything was going well. But then Saul knew that because he wasn't serving God, that God had chosen someone else and that God was not really with Saul anymore. Because Saul was not a man after God's own heart. So things started to go worse for David humanly. Saul started to suspect David and eventually start trying to kill him and persecute him. So kind of this next section of David's life, I think, is more like traveling through the darkness on his journey. He's kind of in a dark time, a time of night or darkness. So Psalm 63:6, kind of describing this part of his life. "When I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches." So just kind of think about that as this is a time where David is, he's seen God's glory, he's seen God's power. He knows God can deliver him out of the lion, the bear. The Philistine is much more powerful. Goliath is much more powerful than Saul. But David goes through a lot of very difficult, very long, very repetitive challenges. He's always in fear of his life. Saul's chasing him everywhere he goes for days and days, days without end. He's always worried about being killed by Saul. So, and it's a good reminder that, God does not say we are not going to go through dark times or periods where we don't understand necessarily why we're going through that. And, even David, a man after God's own heart, he went through those times, and he has times of doubt or fear and questioning. But I want to think about those times kind of as David is meditating on, his relationship with God and God's faithfulness during these times, during these challenges. He's thinking about those things. So, as he's serving God, he's even started to be chased out. He has to leave his wife behind. Michal is his wife, Saul's daughter. Saul chases him away. Saul's trying to kill him, so he loses his family basically, loses his home. He's out in the wilderness. He's running from cave to ditch, running away from Saul. So I think a lot of us would think, I've served God faithfully. Why is God doing this to me? Or, we'd have that thought come across our minds. And, I'm sure David is wondering, why am I going through this perhaps? And it's often because, something's happening that's not going according to our plan. We think we have a plan. We think, I see God's plan is probably my plan too. And, we sometimes assume what God's plan is going to be. But God's plan is perfect for us, and God has promised that He will work all things together for our good. So even though David's going through this difficult time, because David does have, David trusts God, even though he's going through all these things, he keeps that faith and following after God. So if we look a little further, this is just a few chapters later in 1 Samuel chapter 30. Well, actually, this is more towards the end of the dark period for David, but I think it's kind of a good summary story of some of the challenges David faced. So 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 1, we'll read down to verse 6. It says, "And it came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south in Ziklag and smitten Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept, until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives were taken captives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in his God, in the Lord his God." So how amazing is this, if we see here, so Ziklag is the city that David and the men that were following him, David had, I think, about 600 men that were with him while he was kind of exiled from Saul and from Israel. And Ziklag was their home city, basically, where they were staying at this time. And, they came back one day, and the city was burned with fire. Their families were all gone. And, every man among them, it says the people were grieved, everyone for their children. I'm sure we could, if we think about if we lost everything all at once, how would we take that? And you can see a lot of the people that were following David, they talked about killing David. They were talking about stoning him because they were so upset about this. And David was greatly distressed, it says. But what did David do in the face of that? David encouraged himself in the Lord his God, it says. So he has this strength, not because of himself. He has this strength because he has a simple faith in God's faithfulness. David doesn't understand the solution. David doesn't know if all their families are alive or dead. But he encouraged himself before he knows the solution, in God. He trusts simply that God will bless and will take care of him. So, because he has faith in God before the challenge, he's able to have faith during the challenge, even before he sees the answer. So if we read down verse 7 there in 1 Samuel 30, it says, "And David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, Shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, Pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So David went. We'll stop there in verse 9. So, immediately after the grief they're going through, David encourages himself in the Lord, and immediately what does he do? He turns to God. He seeks God's counsel. He doesn't say, I'll trust that God's going to deliver this, let's go. He asks God, should I pursue? Do I need to, I think this maybe is what I should do, but God, do you want me to do this? And I think that's an important distinction too. Sometimes we think, okay, I'll trust God in this, but I know the next step is this. But we need to remember to ask God even the little questions. God, do you want me to do this? God, how would you have me serve you? And so God gives the direction to David to follow these people and to pursue. And so it says simply in the beginning of verse 9, so David went. God tells him to go, and he goes right away. So if we think about there in Psalm 63, we read about him meditating on the night watches, but as he comes through the darkness, out of that darkness, verse 7 says in Psalm 63, Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. So because David remembered God's faithfulness in his life, he's able to rejoice and trust in the shadow of his wings. He has a reason to be encouraged. He has a reason to have hope and to rejoice. To go through this time, not just not complaining, but to be joyful in that time. That's a difficult thing for us to do humanly. But if we're thinking about who God is and what he's done and how faithful he is, we can see God has given David this joy. And I really love the way verse 8 says this, and I think it's probably one of my favorite verses in the Bible here, but it says, My soul followeth hard after thee. So David's soul followed hard after the Lord. David was absolutely determined to follow the Lord come what may. I think this is just a key aspect of David. He was absolutely committed to following God, and that was his first and only priority. And to follow hard after God sometimes will bring you through hard roads, but that was his purpose. So, kind of the next part of David's life, he's gone through this dark period, but he remembers who God is and what God's promised is kind of the next phase of his life. So through all these trials where Saul's seeking out any possible way to kill David, we see that David maintained his course in following God, not trying to defeat Saul. Many or most people in David's position would have wanted to take an opportunity that he could, take any opportunity to defeat Saul, to kill Saul. Saul was just constantly trying to it's really murder, it's not like a war or anything. Saul was out there trying to murder David. But we know that David didn't take those opportunities. David didn't seek to kill Saul. David spared Saul because he had respect to God's promise. He wasn't willing to go out and go beyond God's will for David's life. So, if we back up there, 1 Samuel 26:8. So this is one of the times, from a human perspective, if you think about who David was, the warrior that he had become over this time, and then he's just given this opportunity, and I wonder how many people would react in this situation. But starting verse 8 in 1 Samuel 26, says, Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. So, Abishai is one of David's head guys, really powerful warrior, and he says, God has delivered Saul right into your hand. Saul doesn't even know David and his men are right next to him, and Abishai says, let me kill him right now. God's obviously delivered Saul right to your hand, on a silver platter almost. And verse 9 says, And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. So, directly after directly after the trial of faith, he's going through all these difficult times. Saul is trying to kill him. He's presented this perfect opportunity to have all that pursuit wiped away right away. David says, I'm not going to go beyond what God says. I'm not going to stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. And, also when we're reading about in chapter 30, where they're going through this really difficult time where their families are taken, their city is burned. He just lost everything. God brings him through that. God is faithful to David. God brings him through a difficult time, but he shows him his faithfulness. And at that time, David and his men are then in Ziklag. They're able to go out and defeat the Amalekites who had taken all their families. They get everything back. And at that same time, right after the challenge, David is faithful. God blesses him after that, and then right at the same time, actually, Saul is killed in battle, right when David and his men are defeating and recapturing their families, reclaiming their families. Saul is killed in battle. So we see that even much earlier, when David was back here, had the opportunity to kill Saul, he said, I'm not going to do this. God will take care of him, and I'm not worried about it. We see right after this second great trial that God did take care of Saul. Saul descended into battle and died, it says. And so David didn't stretch forth his hand, but God did take care of it. So Psalm 63:9, as we think about God's faithfulness, says, But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes. And we see that David's faith was well founded. We see that David had this in his mind, that he knew God would take care of it and he wouldn't go beyond that. And we see that God's faithful in that. And even though that made his life more difficult at that time, chapter 26, there's a lot of time between that and when Saul dies. But he chose the road that was more difficult at the time. And we see that in doing that, God is faithful to him and blesses him later for doing that. And we see that actually exactly as David said, as he trusted God would, David did destroy the wicked, the wicked did perish, but God spared David and God blessed David. So Psalm 63 verse 11 then, looking towards the end there, says, But the king shall rejoice in God, everyone that sweareth by him shall glory, but the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. So David trusted that God would take care of the outcome, and David said, God's got it, and all I'm going to do is rejoice in God and trust God. And God blessed him in that. So, just kind of taking a step back and summarizing this, let's come back to the two questions we were thinking about earlier in the message here. As I mentioned, what was David's destination on? What was destination he was focused on his entire life? And you can see this throughout the rest of his life. I could go on, but David does face absolute challenges, but he keeps his eyes on the Lord. So what destination was he focused on, and how did he travel while he was traveling? So first, his destination. Where do you think David was trying to get to in life? What was his purpose? If we think, was his purpose to have an easy life, I would say he probably wouldn't have charged at an 800-pound Philistine that was trying to kill him. Probably would not have gone through all the difficult things, charged at the lion of the bear. He wouldn't have gone in those things if he was trying to have an easy life. Are we trying to have an easy life? Is that what God has called us to do, is not to have an easy life? That is not our purpose. It's to not have an easy life. So was David's purpose to have fame or power? So obviously David was lifted up pretty early on in his life. He was put in a big position of power. But there was a much easier path to eventually becoming king. If he wanted to be king, he was presented actually with two different opportunities to kill Saul very easily. And if his purpose in life was, I want to be king of Israel, I want to have power and do that, it would have been really easy to just kill Saul and take it right there. Especially, and it wouldn't have been necessarily unjustified, at least from a human perspective. Someone's trying to kill you to defend yourself, but David wouldn't do it. So obviously his purpose is not to be king of Israel. His goal in life was not to become the king, to not become the leader. That was not David's destination. And if you look at David's life, there's a lot of decisions he makes that you just think, man, he made the hard decision there. He's going head into the rock right there. There's a lot of difficult paths he chose. So why would he do that? Why does he keep taking all these difficult roads? Because he is not headed towards any of these places that the world will try to take us. He's not headed towards riches. He's not headed towards fame. He's headed on the straight and narrow. And that goes, his eyes were on heaven. His eyes were on serving God. And so if the road, the straight and narrow, took him through rocks, he was going to go through those rocks. If it took him through Philistines, bears, Saul, he was going to go through those things because he was not getting off the path. So, I think if we want to have that unflinching faith and joy, and he was going to be joyful in that. David is one of the most joyful characters you see in the Bible. He's dancing, he's singing all the time, he's thanking God. So that road that, if you look at it from the outside, looks really hard going through these rocks, these difficult things. David's not upset during it. He's going through it joyfully. He's going through it serving God and knowing that he has full assurance that God will take care of him. So the road, it might be difficult, but it doesn't have to be in despair. It doesn't have to be sad. You don't have to be upset about it. You can be joyful even in a difficult road. So the second question, how did David travel through those things? As David's way of walking on his journey throughout his life was certainly not perfect, but we can see that he was that man described after God's own heart. It says that the Lord sought about a man after his own heart. And that's what David wanted. He wanted to serve God. He wasn't forced into serving God. He wasn't serving God to please his parents or his wife or his friends. He was serving God because he wanted to serve God. And he wanted to draw people to the Lord. He wanted to glorify God. Those were the things he was seeking to do. And, we think about drawing people to the Lord. He was, obviously, as you read about him, he was a clear leader. He was a leader of men, but that was not necessarily his purpose, was not to be a leader. David, we don't read about going out to schmooze people. He wasn't like a politician trying to say, hey, come join the David campaign, or try to get on my side against Saul. David was not out there doing that. He was completely focused on making sure he was serving God in every place that God put him. And when people saw the joy and the faith that he had, they gravitated towards him. They said, man, this guy's got something that I need to know more about. And they saw, as he followed God, God blessed him. So, people were even attracted to following him in that. So, as we're going through our lives, if we are serving God, if we are not focused on getting to a certain place that we want to get to, if we're focused on one path straight to God and serving him, if we're faithful in that and joyful in that, God will, bless that. God uses that to be a light and encouragement to those around us. So, we need to think about if we want to follow kind of in David's steps and David's path as he obeyed the Lord. If we do want to do that, we need to think about two things. Number one, where are we going? We can't serve two masters. We have to be wholly dedicated to serving the Lord in our lives, to living for Jesus, regardless of the consequences. So, if you keep your life's purpose pointed only at serving Jesus, you will always have a clear direction to be running in. If you get distracted, if your destination is not on serving Jesus, it's going to seem hard to go through some of the things God might bring you through. But if you're a child of God, if you keep your eyes as your focus is on serving God, then your destination, your decisions will always be clear. We ask for guidance, we ask God for that, and there are things that might not seem clear at first, but if our heart's purpose is to say, God, in this situation, what do you want me to do? Jesus, what do you want me to do? Jesus, how would you have me to handle the situation? That will clear up a lot of our decisions and a lot of our choices in life. If we just unflinchingly, that's the only question we're asking. We're not saying, God, what do you want me to do and how will I pay for it? Or God, what do you want me to do and what if I get hurt? If we say, God, what do you want me to do? And end the question there, that will give us clear direction. And I think number two, lead and live by example. Don't complain about the problems you see in other people. It's really easy to say, oh, this person does that, or I saw them doing this, and God, I've done more than them or less. That is not our job. Our job is to live be Christ-like. Follow Christ's example. Follow Paul's example. Follow David's example. Point people to the Lord, and don't worry about how the chips stack up in people's minds. So, taking a step back though, for those that are lost, remember as we read, the Lord will not spare the evildoers, Jesus presents this world with a glorious gospel that declares in Mark, repent ye and believe the gospel, and then in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 3 and 4, says, for I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. So, for the lost, there is no, your goal is not, your destination is certainly not heaven and God if you don't know the Lord. And the only important question in your life right now is, what are you going to do about the gospel? Do you believe in Jesus? Or do you want to follow your own path and claim your own righteousness? And that will, God says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, no, not one. So Jesus is the only hope we have for salvation. For those of us that do know the Lord, that do know him as the eternal Savior of our souls, we should really make our heart's desire, like David's, to follow hard after the Lord, knowing that he is faithful. So again, I'll read Psalm 63, verse 8. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. Follow God unflinchingly and know that he will do what's best for you. Trust that. So, that's all I have today, so I just want to leave you with those thoughts. But again, just thinking about how faithful God is and what our purpose is here in life. So, with that, we'll dismiss in a word of